Yes. Okay. So the Dead Sea Scrolls are considered the greatest archaeological find in the 20th century. Real simply, real short. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, just as the state of Israel formed, and in the upheaval of the war between Israel and the Arabs in that region, some archaeologists began to get their eyes on ancient scrolls that were found in caves along the Dead Sea, which is about 15-ish miles from Jerusalem, 1,000 feet below sea level, the lowest place on Earth. And these got on people who were selling like artifacts, like they got on the market. And so somebody wanted to know whether they were ancient or not. So they identified this as an ancient manuscript based on the shape of the letters. And so news flash, scrolls have been found in the Dead Sea. And they were found by Bedouins who are just shepherds. And they were always scrounging for artifacts because they could sell them on the antiquities market and make money. So when they figured out that there were, like valuable scrolls that they could sell, it was like all out by the Bedouins on going into caves all around the Dead Sea. And eventually 11 caves were discovered. Actually, a 12th cave was discovered just within the last decade. So there's actually 12 caves now, 11 caves. And just imagine this, as the state of Israel is being founded, ancient manuscripts from Jews dating to before Jesus. So like 3rd century BCE, 2nd century BCE texts were found in.
And how do they date them? Is that carbon dating the paper that they're on, or the material that
so
they're
it's
on?
it's people who know ancient alphabets and how they're formed, and then carbon dating, where they take a piece of the organic material and through a process can give a range of dates.
Yep. So we have ancient scrolls that are scientifically dated to
Yes,
hundreds of years before Jesus.
Yep. And they're like not few. I mean, there's about 800 to 1,000 documents represented. Some of them are just little pieces, little fragments, but there were 1,000 different scrolls that were pieces of scrolls that were found in these caves. And they basically are in 3 categories. There are biblical scrolls that were found, or pieces of the biblical text. And every book in the Old Testament is represented, except Nehemiah and Esther. They didn't find a piece of those books, but all the other Jewish scripture was found. Some of it was like they found 3 complete Isaiah scrolls. Like you just look it up on the internet, you see this amazing scroll of Isaiah. And this is the thing about veracity is these Isaiah scrolls and other books were analyzed very quickly and compared to our manuscript tradition that the Hebrew Bible is based on, that we translate into English in the Old Testament. That very little is different between the tradition that we use. That's actually really late. Like the manuscript we use for the Old Testament is like from the medieval period, like 1,000, 1,200, somewhere in there, AD. So that's the earliest manuscript we've had of the Old Testament. So we go back, 1,000 years or something, and we find these scrolls, and the texts match, for all intents and purposes, perfectly. And that was revolutionary. These are copies of copies of copies of copies, but it means that the tradition of the Hebrew Bible has been largely stable for 2,000 years, which is remarkable. And the other big thing about the Dead Sea Scrolls is they have sectarian manuscripts, which are manuscripts that had never been seen before, that are apparently written by a Jewish sect. And a lot of their beliefs, which were eccentric compared to what we knew before it, but a number of their theological convictions are shared by the apostolic authors. As an example, the New Covenant has been inaugurated in Jesus's death and resurrection. Well, so the New Testament community saw themselves as receivers of, or the beginnings of, the New Covenant. Well, this community who's responsible for these scrolls believed that the New Covenant had also begun. So here you have two Jewish movements that are not connected, that share this kind of like, the New Covenant has been inaugurated and one day it will be fully realized or consummated in the future. The eschatology, very similar. And so the New Testament's message has not only been, kind of validated as ancient Jewish thinking, but we are now able to kind of see how the New Testament fits within the diverse Judaism in the first century. So it revolutionized Old Testament, but equally revolutionized New Testament studies. And after their discovery, the field just was changed like that. And we're still working through the implications here, 80 years later.
It's pretty fast. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it. It's like the story of finding these manuscripts, and some of like the, having to go to raid somebody's house, and under boards of their floor, there was this full ancient manuscript called the Temple Scroll that was just stored in a shoebox, under his floor, so just crazy stuff like that. And the people that were involved in it, just the whole thing, and let alone, the biblical studies stuff, which is really cool too. But I would recommend anyone, look up some stuff about the Dead Sea Scrolls, because it's not only an archaeological discovery, but the whole story is like, you couldn't make that stuff up.
Right. Yeah, I almost feel like they've been underappreciated recently. I know it was front page news for a while, when they were found, but I feel like people don't, in a sense, talk about them enough. Particularly, I think about like the full Isaiah scroll. You have like very distinct prophecies about Jesus, like very clear, that people talk about. We read them at Christmas time, kind of this foreshadowing. And to say like, we can scientifically date these prophetic texts to before the time of Jesus. I just think is like so remarkable to say, like, of course there's lots of room for faith here, and there's lots of other prophecies that we don't have as clearly. But to think that here's something that a historian would date to pre-Jesus, and then you have historical documents of a certain extent of the life of Jesus, and they really seem to line up, and you think, wow, this is amazing. And then I feel like it unlocks then it's such an encouragement to then believe that the other Old Testament prophecies really are, that there's something to them, that you can trust them, given this piece of historical evidence. Then I feel like unlocks a whole nother level of understanding. I just think I think it's so cool.
Totally. I can't agree with you more. I especially see this in church communities. Like the significance of the Dead Sea Scrolls is something that academics continue to write about. It's really important, in a lot of different things. But I don't think that sort of significance has ever kind of really trickled into how we think about the New Testament or the
Agreed.
the tradition, the textual tradition of our Bible. Like the earliest manuscript was what came from the medieval period, but in 1948 we found a text that dates in the 3rd century BCE, and they kind of line up. I mean, again, it doesn't prove the authorship, or but it shows that the text can be relied upon as a witness, that it's been this text for that long, and presumably they're copying it from another text, which was copied by another text, and the kind of manuscript tradition, takes us, it's really far back. And I think that alone is something that we should be talking about more. And then, understanding Jesus and the Gospels, as I said at the early top of the thing, as Jewish texts, and understanding Jesus's, teaching in conversation with, this Jewish sect. That here we have the very writings of a 1st century Jewish sect that was formed before the time of Jesus, but existed in and around Jesus. We don't know if they knew each other. Some people argue that maybe, or think maybe John the Baptist had some affiliation with the community in the Dead Sea. That's another topic, but their messages are very similar. The difference, of course, significant difference, is Jesus is the Messiah. So they're not the same, but they share, like this was the culture. These were the expectations. So anyway, yeah, I think it would benefit people, their faith in the church, to understand Scripture better and have a greater confidence in the text that we have.